On the night of April 25, 1986, the residents of Pripyat were asleep in their beds. They had been assured by Soviet officials on television that a nuclear meltdown was a practical impossibility, a disaster that might happen only once every 10,000 years. Inside a reactor core, free neutrons split uranium atoms. That split releases more neutrons, which divide even more atoms, creating a rapid, continuous chain reaction. We harness the massive amount of heat this produces to boil water, create steam, and spin the turbines that generate our electricity. To keep the chain reaction from running out of control, operators use control rods. These act like the brakes on a car. By lowering them into the core, they absorb excess neutrons and keep the energy output stable. Keeping a reactor stable relies entirely on this delicate physical balance. And on this specific night, that balance is about to be tested under extreme pressure. The operators at Chernobyl needed to run a safety test on Reactor 4. If a total power loss ever occurred, the backup diesel generators would take about 60 seconds to fully kick in. They wanted to see if the slowing turbines could generate enough residual electricity to keep the cooling pumps running during that minute-long gap. An earlier power outage at a nearby coal plant forced Chernobyl to maintain full output all day to supply the grid. The test was pushed late into the night, falling into the hands of the midnight shift, a crew that had not been briefed on the procedure. Previous attempts to pass this test had failed, and the higher-ups in Moscow were finally through with hearing excuses. The operators were handed a testing program where instructions were literally crossed out in pen, accompanied by a voice on the phone ordering them to follow those crossed-out steps. The operators were caught between physics and politics, managing a reactor in a culture that punished failure far more than it rewarded caution. At low power, xenon gas built up inside the core. Normally, this burns away, but at these lower levels, xenon accumulated rapidly, choking the chain reaction and plummeting power. To force power back up, operators extracted 200 of the 206 control rods, leaving the highly unstable core unshielded. The reactor was now operating outside of its safety margins. Still, Shift Supervisor Anatoly Dyatlov ordered the test to proceed. He needed a successful result to avoid a stain on his record. Hubris had overridden protocol. By manually stripping away the brakes to force a reaction, the crew created a volatile environment just as they began cutting the power for their test. At 1:24 a.m., the simulation started. The operators shut down the steam heading to the turbines. With the water flow reduced and the reactor unshielded, the core experienced a sudden, violent surge in power. Realizing they were losing control, an operator hit the AZ5 button. This is the emergency off switch, designed to drop all suspended control rods back into the core to kill the nuclear reaction instantly. But Chernobyl's reactors suffered a hidden design flaw. The control rods were tipped with graphite. While the boron shafts absorb neutrons to stop a reaction, graphite actually accelerates it. As 20 tips entered the surging core at once, they triggered a massive spike in reactivity. The heat instantly vaporized the cooling water into a massive steam bomb. The pressure blew the 10,000-ton steel lid through the roof. A second explosion followed seconds later, launching radioactive fuel directly into the night sky. Inside the plant, the denial was immediate. Dyatlov refused to believe the reactor had blown, even as his men waded through radioactive water and stared into the open, burning crater. The men in the control room made catastrophic errors, but the final blow was out of their hands. It was a mechanical trap built directly into the state-approved blueprint. High-dose radiation strips electrons from atoms in the human body. This breaks chemical bonds, liquefying tissue in the gastrointestinal tract and destroying the bone marrow until the immune system completely collapses. Contrary to popular belief, irradiated victims are not contagious. Once a person's skin is cleaned and their contaminated clothing is removed, they cannot transmit radiation to others. Western media later popularized several myths about these early hours. They claimed townspeople died watching the fire from a bridge of death, which never happened. They also reported that the 3 men who volunteered to drain water from beneath the reactor died immediately, when in truth, they lived long, healthy lives. The real horror was the Soviet government's response. Rather than evacuating Pripyat, officials blocked the roads and cut the phone lines. They kept thousands of families in the dark to stop what they called misinformation from leaking to the world. It took 2 full days for the truth to escape the perimeter. Scientists in Sweden detected radiation drifting on the wind, and American satellites soon captured photographs of the ruin. The initial blasts killed a handful of workers immediately. But the government's attempt to maintain an illusion of control, leaving citizens to breathe toxic dust just to save face, exposed hundreds of thousands of people to a silent, lethal threat. Stopping the fire required an army of liquidators. When high-tech robots immediately broke down in the intense radiation fields, human beings were sent to the roof with shovels to clear radioactive debris by hand. Valery Legasov, the deputy director of a top atomic energy institute, managed the crisis. As he investigated the wreckage, he realized that the disaster was a symptom of a much deeper institutional failure. Legasov recorded how years of administrative failures converged in Reactor 4. His testimony exposed a culture that hid design flaws and treated honest reporting as an act of treason. Today, the remnants of Reactor 4 are entombed beneath a massive steel and concrete arch. The surrounding area remains a vast exclusion zone, where wildlife has reclaimed the empty apartment blocks of Pripyat. Chernobyl stalled global nuclear energy for decades, yet the catastrophe reveals more about political systems than atomic physics. The reactor failed because an unaccountable state prioritized its own prestige over human life.